Welcome to PastCast. Join us as we dive into the events and lives that shaped our world. Each episode reveals fascinating facts and stories from history. Ready to journey through time?
Sounds like fun.
Today we're headed to Siberia.
Okay.
The year is 1908.
You're right.
Picture this. 80 million trees, an area twice the size of Los Angeles, completely flattened in an instant. That's what happened during the Tunguska Event.
What's fascinating about the Tunguska Event is that over a century later, scientists are still debating what exactly caused this devastation. We have eyewitness accounts, scientific expeditions, and lots of theories, but no definitive answers.
It sounds like something out of a science fiction novel. A massive explosion, millions of trees flattened, but no impact crater. Where do we even begin to unravel this mystery?
Well, the story begins on June 30th, 1908, a little after 7 a.m. in the morning, near the Tunguska River, a remote area in Siberia. People miles away reported seeing a fiery object streak across the sky, followed by an intense heat and a sound like thunder, only much, much louder. The shockwave from the blast was so strong it knocked people off their feet over 40 miles away.
40 miles? That's incredible. Whatever caused this was obviously incredibly powerful. What did scientists think had happened when they first heard about it?
Well, initially there wasn't much scientific attention paid to the event. It happened in such a remote, sparsely populated area that it took years for news to spread, and even longer for researchers to reach the site. But the stories from the witnesses were so dramatic, descriptions of a blinding light, a deafening roar, and the ground shaking, that it was clear something extraordinary had occurred.
So for almost 20 years, this event was shrouded in mystery. What finally prompted the first scientific expedition to Tunguska?
A Russian mineralogist named Leonid Kulik became obsessed with the event. He led the first expedition in 1927, almost 2 decades after the blast. What Kulik found when he arrived was a scene of utter devastation. He documented 80 million trees lying flat, all radiating outwards from a central point. He estimated the blast zone to be about 830 square miles. To give you some perspective, that's larger than the entire city of London.
Wow, I'm trying to imagine the scale of that destruction. It must have been an overwhelming sight for Kulik and his team.
Right.
Didn't he find any clues to the cause of the explosion? What about an impact crater?
That's the most perplexing part. Despite the scale of the destruction, there was no impact crater. Kulik searched extensively for one, but he came up empty-handed. And this absence of a crater is what has fueled decades of debate and speculation about what actually caused the Tunguska event.
Okay, so we have a massive explosion, widespread devastation, and no crater. This is where it gets really interesting. What are some of the leading theories scientists have proposed to explain this? Did any of the eyewitness accounts shed light on what they saw in the sky?
Many of the eyewitnesses described seeing a bright, fiery object streaking across the sky. This led to a few theories, with the most popular being that the object was an asteroid or comet fragment.
Okay, so space rocks are the prime suspects. But how do we explain the lack of a crater?
That's where the idea of an airburst comes into play. Imagine a comet or asteroid entering the Earth's atmosphere at an incredibly high speed. The intense heat and pressure cause it to explode in midair before it ever reaches the ground.
So like a giant aerial explosion, but without the object actually hitting the ground? That would explain the widespread damage, but no impact crater. Are there any other details that support this theory?
There is. You see, in the days following the Tunguska event, something very strange happened. People across Europe and Asia reported seeing glowing skies, bright enough to read by at midnight. These eerie, luminous clouds persisted for days, sparking a lot of theories at the time.
Glowing skies. That's a fascinating detail I hadn't heard before. It sounds like something out of a science fiction novel. What could explain that?
Scientists believe these glowing skies, which are known as noctilucent clouds, might hold the key to understanding the Tunguska event. You've probably never seen these kinds of clouds before. They form much higher in the atmosphere than normal clouds and are only visible under specific conditions. They're made up of tiny ice crystals that reflect sunlight even after the sun has set.
So if these glowing skies were noctilucent clouds, how do they connect back to the explosion in Siberia?
Well, these noctilucent clouds could have been formed by vast amounts of dust and ice particles being injected into the upper atmosphere by the exploding object. This dust and ice would have scattered sunlight, creating those unusual glowing effects. In fact, similar phenomena have been observed after space shuttle launches, where water vapor released into the upper atmosphere creates noctilucent-like clouds.
Okay, so these noctilucent clouds provide some pretty compelling evidence that supports the airburst theory. But are there any other explanations scientists have considered for the Tunguska event?
While the airburst theory is the most popular, it's not the only one. Another possibility is that the object didn't explode at all, but instead skipped off the Earth's atmosphere like a stone skipping across a pond.
A cosmic skipping stone. That's a pretty incredible image. How could something that large just graze the Earth's atmosphere like that?
It sounds implausible, but it is possible. Space is vast, and objects are constantly moving around. While it's a rare occurrence, an object entering the atmosphere at a shallow angle could heat up intensely from friction, create a shock wave, and then skip back out into space without ever hitting the ground.
So this cosmic slipping stone theory would also explain the lack of an impact crater. But is there any evidence to support it?
There's been some recent research that lends credence to this theory. A 2020 study proposed that the Tunguska event might have been caused by a massive iron asteroid, about the size of a football stadium, that grazed the atmosphere and created the shockwave before exiting back into space.
An iron asteroid the size of a football stadium? This is mind-boggling.
Okay.
So we have the airburst theory and the cosmic skipping stone theory. Are there any other contenders in this cosmic whodunit?
There are.
Okay.
And some of them get pretty creative. Some researchers believe the explosion might have been caused by a massive natural gas eruption from the ground. You see, Siberia has vast reserves of natural gas, and it's possible that a large pocket of methane could have erupted and ignited, causing the blast.
A giant methane explosion.
Yeah.
That's interesting, but wouldn't there be some evidence of a gas eruption on the ground?
You would think so. However, the evidence in Tunguska is inconclusive. While some geological disturbances have been noted, nothing definitively points to a massive gas eruption.
All right, so maybe not the most likely scenario. What other out-of-the-box theories have been proposed?
Well, some have even suggested it was a mini black hole colliding with Earth, or a chunk of antimatter annihilating with normal matter upon contact with our atmosphere.
Okay, now we're venturing into science fiction territory.
Right. While these theories are intriguing, they haven't gained much traction in the scientific community.
But I have to admit, they do add a bit of spice to the whole mystery.
Yeah.
And there's one more creative explanation I've heard of that I'm dying to ask you about. The alien spacecraft theory.
Ah, yes, the ever-popular alien theory. Some people believe that the Tunguska event was caused by an alien spacecraft either crashing into Earth or maybe even deliberately sacrificing itself to destroy an incoming asteroid and save humanity.
It's certainly a dramatic story, I'll give them that.
But
is there any actual evidence to support it?
None whatsoever. It's purely speculation. The Tunguska event sparked people's imaginations, and it's understandable why some would turn to extraterrestrial explanations.
Okay, so we can safely put the alien theory in the fun but unlikely category.
Exactly. The scientific consensus still leans toward the asteroid or comet explanations, but even those are still being debated.
It's amazing to think that after all this time, we're still not entirely sure what caused the Tunguska event. It's a reminder that even in the 21st century, there are still mysteries out there waiting to be solved.
Absolutely. And that's what makes science so fascinating. It's a constant process of discovery, questioning, and refining our understanding of the world around us.
So what does all this mean for us here in the present? Besides the fact that we have a really cool historical mystery to ponder.
The Tunguska event serves as a stark reminder that Earth is not immune to cosmic impacts. It also highlights the importance of ongoing research and efforts to track and potentially deflect near-Earth objects that could pose a threat to our planet.
So we should be keeping an eye on the skies, just in case.
Absolutely. And not just with our eyes. There are sophisticated telescopes and monitoring systems constantly scanning space for potential threats.
That's reassuring to know. We may not know exactly what happened in Tunguska, but hopefully we're better prepared if something similar were to happen again.
That's the goal. But there's always more to learn. And as our technology and understanding of the universe evolve, we may one day unravel the remaining secrets of the Tunguska event.
Well, I, for one, am eager to hear what future research uncovers. It's a reminder that even in the most remote corners of our planet, history can unfold in the most unexpected ways. But before we get ahead of ourselves, there's one more piece of this puzzle that I find particularly intriguing.
Oh, do tell. I'm all ears.
Well, we've talked about all these different theories for what caused the explosion: comets, asteroids, even methane explosions. But there's also the question of scale. Even with the airburst theory, some researchers believe the object might have been smaller than initially thought.
That's right. It might surprise you to know that some scientists believe the object that caused all this devastation might have been only tens of meters in diameter. To put that in perspective, that's about the size of a blue whale.
Wait, smaller? How could something that small cause that much damage? I mean, we're talking about 80 million trees flattened over hundreds of square miles.
That's where things get even more interesting. Back in 2007, a team at Sandia National Laboratories used supercomputer simulations to model the Tunguska event. Their results suggested that a smaller object, maybe only 30 to 50 meters wide, entering the atmosphere at a steeper angle and exploding closer to the ground, could still create a shock wave powerful enough to flatten trees over a vast area.
So it's not just about the size of the object, but also how it interacts with the atmosphere, the angle of entry, and the altitude of the airburst.
Precisely. And that's why the Tunguska event continues to fascinate scientists. There's still so much we don't know for sure.
I'm starting to realize that the more we learn about the Tunguska event, the more mysterious it becomes. It really is like a cosmic puzzle with some pieces still missing.
It is, but that's part of what makes it so captivating, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And who knows, maybe one day, with advances in technology and research, we'll find those missing pieces and finally solve the Tunguska puzzle once and for all. But until then, I think we can all agree that it's a story that continues to spark our imaginations and reminds us of the incredible power and mystery of the universe we live in.
It certainly is a captivating story. And, even if we were to pinpoint the exact type and size of the object, there's still another layer to this mystery that I find particularly intriguing.
Oh, I'm all ears. What else is there to consider?
Well, we've been talking about the immediate impact, the explosion, the flattened trees, the glowing skies.
Right.
But what about the long-term effects? What happened to the Tunguska region in the aftermath of such a traumatic event?
It's a great question. It's easy to get caught up in the immediate drama of the explosion, but the long-term ecological impact is just as important. Did the scientists who visited the site years later find any evidence of how the area recovered?
They did. In fact, some of the most interesting findings came from studying the trees that survived the blast. Scientists noticed something peculiar. Many of the trees in the central zone of the explosion were still standing, but their growth patterns had changed dramatically. They seemed to have experienced a sudden burst of growth in the years following the event, almost as if they were trying to compensate for the loss of their neighbors.
That's fascinating. So the trees closest to the blast weren't completely obliterated. They survived, but the event left its mark on them in a way that scientists could observe decades later. Is there an explanation for this unusual growth spurt?
Scientists believe it might have something to do with the sudden influx of nutrients into the soil. You see, the intense heat from the explosion would have vaporized much of the existing vegetation, releasing nutrients back into the ground. This, combined with the increased sunlight reaching the forest floor, could have created ideal conditions for rapid tree growth.
It sounds like the Tunguska event, while devastating in the short term, might have inadvertently benefited some of the surviving trees. Is there anything else scientists have learned from studying the long-term impact on the region?
There is. Researchers have also been studying the genetic makeup of the plants and animals in the Tunguska region. They found some intriguing evidence of mutations, possibly linked to the radiation released during the explosion.
Wait, radiation? I hadn't considered that. Are we talking about dangerous levels of radiation?
Not necessarily. While the Tunguska event would have released some radiation, it's unlikely to have been enough to cause widespread harm to humans or animals. However, even low levels of radiation can sometimes lead to genetic mutations, which can then be passed down to future generations.
So these mutations are like subtle echoes of the event, imprinted on the DNA of the plants and animals that inhabit the region.
Oh.
It's amazing to think that an event that happened over a century ago could still be influencing the genetics of life in the Tunguska region today.
It really highlights the enduring impact of such catastrophic events. And the study of these genetic mutations might provide us with even more clues about the nature of the Tunguska object itself.
How so?
By analyzing the specific types of mutations, scientists might be able to gain insights into the types and levels of radiation released during the event. This, in turn, could help them narrow down the possibilities for what caused the explosion in the first place. For instance, certain types of radiation are more characteristic of a cometary airburst, while others might point to a different type of object.
So the investigation into the Tunguska event isn't just about looking back in time. It's also about understanding the present and potentially even predicting the future. This information could be crucial in helping us prepare for potential threats from space. It's a reminder that even seemingly remote events can have far-reaching implications.
Exactly. The Tunguska event serves as a powerful reminder that we are part of a much larger cosmic ecosystem, and that what happens out there in space can have profound effects here on Earth.
Speaking of what happens out there in space, you mentioned earlier that scientists are still searching for definitive proof of what caused the Tunguska event. Have there been any recent discoveries or breakthroughs that shed more light on the mystery?
There have been some exciting developments in recent years. Remember how we talked about Leonid Kulik, the scientist who led the first expedition to Tunguska in the 1920s?
Yes, he's the one who documented the flattened trees and searched for an impact crater.
Right. Well, in the 1990s, a team of Italian researchers went back and re-examined Kulik's original notes and field data. They also conducted new surveys of the Tunguska site using modern technology, and what they found was quite intriguing.
Okay, what did they uncover? Did they find that elusive impact crater after all?
Not exactly a crater, but something perhaps even more interesting.
Oh,
Their research led them to a small bowl-shaped lake called Lake Checo, located about 5 miles north of the epicenter of the explosion. They believe that Lake Checo might be the result of a fragment of the Tunguska object actually hitting the ground.
hold on. So after decades of searching for a crater, scientists now think they found a lake that might have been formed by the impact. That seems counterintuitive. How can a lake be evidence of an impact? Wouldn't we expect to see a more typical crater-like formation?
It does seem odd at first, but there's a possible explanation. Remember, the leading theory is that the Tunguska object exploded in the air, but it's possible that some larger fragments survived the airburst and continued on a downward trajectory. These fragments might have been traveling at a lower velocity than the main object, which means they wouldn't have created a classic impact crater upon hitting the ground.
So instead of a massive crater, we get a lake.
Exactly. The impact of a fragment into the soft, marshy ground could have excavated a depression that subsequently filled with water, forming Lake Checo.
It's incredible to think that a lake, a seemingly tranquil and ordinary feature of the landscape, could hold clues to one of the most dramatic events in recent history. But is there any concrete evidence to support the idea that Lake Checo was formed by an impact?
There is some compelling evidence. The Italian researchers conducted several studies of Lake Checo, including seismic surveys and sediment analysis. Their findings showed that the lake is relatively shallow, with a funnel-shaped bottom that's unlike the surrounding lakes in the region. They also found evidence of unusual sediment layers, which could be consistent with an impact event.
So this lake is starting to look more and more like the missing piece of the Tunguska puzzle. But I imagine there are still some skeptics out there. What are some of the counterarguments to the Lake Checo theory?
You're right, not everyone is convinced. Some researchers argue that Lake Checo could have formed naturally through processes like glacial erosion or permafrost thawing. They point out that there are other lakes in the region with similar features. And while the Italian team's findings are intriguing, they haven't found any definitive proof, like fragments of the object itself within the lake.
So the debate continues. But even if Lake Checo turns out to be a natural formation, it's still fascinating to consider the possibility that it might hold a direct link to the Tunguska event.
It is. And it highlights the importance of continued research and exploration. Who knows what other secrets the Tunguska region might be hiding?
Speaking of secrets, is there anything else about the Tunguska event that we haven't touched on yet?
There's one more angle to the story that I think is worth exploring, and it's one that often gets overlooked.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What haven't we talked about yet?
We've been focusing on the scientific aspects of the Tunguska event, the theories, the evidence, the impact, but we haven't really talked about the human side of the story.
You're right. What was it like for the people who lived in the region? How did they experience the event, and how did it shape their lives and their understanding of the world?
That's a crucial part of the story that we often forget about. Remember, this event happened in 1908 in a remote part of Siberia where people lived in close connection with nature. For them, the Tunguska event wasn't just a scientific mystery, it was a deeply personal and spiritual experience.
I can only imagine the fear and confusion they must have felt. To witness something so powerful, so inexplicable, must have been incredibly unsettling. Do we have any accounts from the indigenous people who lived in the area?
We do. Unfortunately, many of their stories were passed down orally and weren't recorded until years later. But these accounts provide valuable insights into how the event was perceived and interpreted by the people who lived closest to it. Many of them saw the event as a sign, a message from the spirits or the gods.
That's understandable. In the absence of a scientific explanation, People often turn to their cultural beliefs and traditions to make sense of the unknown. Did these beliefs influence how they reacted to the event?
Absolutely. For some indigenous groups, the Tunguska region became a sacred site, a place where the boundary between the earthly and the spiritual realms had been blurred. They believed the area was now imbued with special powers, and they treated it with reverence and respect.
It's a reminder that the same event can be viewed through multiple lenses: scientific, cultural, spiritual, and each perspective adds another layer of meaning to the story.
Exactly. And it's important to acknowledge and respect these different ways of knowing and understanding the world. The Tunguska event, while a fascinating scientific enigma, also holds deep cultural and spiritual significance for the people who have called that region home for centuries.
I'm starting to realize that the Tunguska event is more than just a story about a mysterious explosion in the Siberian wilderness. It's a story about the power of nature, the limits of our understanding, and the different ways in which humans make sense of the world around them.
Well said, and I think that's what makes it such an enduring and captivating story. It's a story that continues to challenge our assumptions, spark our curiosity, and remind us of the vastness and mystery of the universe we inhabit.
It's certainly been a thought-provoking journey. I feel like I've learned so much more than just the basic facts about the Tunguska event. We've explored the science, the history, the cultural impact, and even the philosophical implications. It's amazing to think that over 100 years later, we're still piecing together the story of the Tunguska event.
It really is.
It really highlights how much we still don't know about our own planet and the universe we live in.
Exactly, and the Tunguska event serves as a potent reminder of how vulnerable we are to events beyond our control. Imagine if something like that were to happen today
Oh, wow.
over a densely populated area.
That's a chilling thought. It makes you realize how important it is to continue researching and monitoring near-Earth objects so we can hopefully prevent something like that from happening again.
Absolutely, and there have been significant advancements in our ability to detect and track potentially hazardous asteroids and comets. We have space-based telescopes, ground-based observatories, and even planetary defense missions being developed to help protect our planet from cosmic threats.
That's reassuring to know.
hmm
It sounds like we've come a long way since 1908, when the world was taken completely by surprise by the Tunguska event.
We have, but there's always more to learn and prepare for. Space is vast and full of mysteries, and the Tunguska event is a powerful reminder that we need to stay vigilant and continue pushing the boundaries of our scientific understanding.
Well, after diving deep into this fascinating event, I have to say I'm left with a mix of awe and a healthy dose of cosmic humility. It's humbling to realize that even in the 21st century, we're still grappling with the mysteries of an event that happened over a century ago.
It is, and I think that's what makes the Tunguska event so enduringly captivating. It's a story that reminds us of the power of nature, the limits of our understanding, and the importance of continued exploration and discovery.
It's also a reminder of the interconnectedness of everything in the universe, from the smallest particles to the largest celestial bodies. What happens out there in space can have a profound impact here on Earth, even in the most remote corners of Siberia.
Well said. And I think the Tunguska event serves as a powerful call to action for all of us to continue learning, exploring, and working together to protect our planet and unravel the mysteries of the cosmos.
Thanks for tuning in to PastCast. We hope today's episode sparked your curiosity for history. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and share. Stay curious and join us next time on PastCast.